Hello, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Jacobs, and I'm the Deputy Director of WorkRise, which is a research to action network hosted by the Urban Institute. I'd like to welcome you to the third and final day of Charting a Resilient Future for U.S. Workers, Solutions to Navigate an Uncertain Economy conference, which is co-hosted by WorkRise and our partners, an esteemed group of organizations dedicated to the economic advancement of all workers. These include the AARP, the Atlanta Fed, the Business Roundtable, the Families and Workers Fund, Jobs for the Future, and Rework America Alliance, a Markle Foundation initiative. For those of you who joined us yesterday, I want to welcome you back. And for those of you who are just tuning in for the first time, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to you. Thank you so much for making time in your day to be with us. So before we get started, I want to share a few housekeeping reminders. First, our event is being recorded and the recording will be posted online afterwards. Second, all our speaker biographies are available online as well as the program. We've enabled closed captions for accessibility. If you prefer to hide those captions or adjust those settings, you can use the live transcript button. All of our participants are muted, but you can type your questions or comments into the Q&A box at any time. And we'd be very grateful if you could take a few minutes to complete the survey that we'll share at the end of the event. Lastly, please do engage with us online on Twitter or other social using the hashtag #ResilientFuturesLive. I'm really excited about our program today. I hope you are too. During our first panel, we have the honor of hearing from Andre Dickens, who's the 61st mayor of the city of Atlanta. Atlanta is one of the fastest growing and most dynamic cities in America, yet it's also grappling with growing income inequality and a real lack of meaningful upward mobility for millions of residents. Mayor Dickens will share some of the bold new ideas and policies the city is pursuing to support economic mobility, including bringing employers and unions to the table together to raise wages of some of the lowest paid workers and to build more mixed income housing. Mayor Dickens will be in conversation with PolicyLink CEO Michael McAfee and Urban Institute President Sarah Rosen-Wartell. In our second panel, we'll turn our attention to both the present and the future of work and how forces that have been building over generations, climate, technological, and demographic change, are shaping both the nature of work and the distribution of opportunity. We'll ask, how can these disruptive forces of change be harnessed to benefit workers and communities? For example, how can automation, which we know accelerated during the COVID-19 pandemic, we're all here on Zoom together, for example, how can that automation actually enhance job quality and benefit workers rather than simply eliminating jobs and shifting livelihoods for the worse? How can workers and businesses move from positions of risk and uncertainty to one of resilience and strength? I'm looking forward to the insights of our panelists, who are some of the brightest minds in research and advocacy engaged with these topics. Before I introduce our opening speaker, I want to take a moment to share an important announcement from WorkRise. So yesterday, our executive director, Todd Green, announced 9 new research grantees who will be pursuing groundbreaking pilot studies over the next few years in partnership with practitioners across America. We're delighted to announce that our grant-making programs are expanding. So we have 3 new grant-making programs that we'll be launching early next year in 2023. 2 of these programs are brand new. One is specifically designed to support labor market and economic mobility researchers at minority-serving institutions, including historically Black colleges and universities, tribal colleges and universities, and Hispanic-serving institutions. The other new program will fund timely projects that respond to emerging labor market issues and trends. And I want to note that both of those new programs will be accepting applications on a rolling basis, so no firm deadline. Our staff will now put the announcement in the chat, and we will be sure to circulate this widely with our networks. We encourage you to do that as well. So now, without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce Ramiro Cavazos, who will provide us with opening remarks to start our program. Ramiro is the president and CEO of the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and also a member of the WorkRise Leadership Board. In his role as the president of the Hispanic Chamber, Ramiro leads the largest advocacy organization for Latino business in the country, and he's an expert in small business and entrepreneurship, which we know is another important pathway for economic mobility. So I'll turn it over to you, Ramiro.
Thank you for the kind introduction. That was very much appreciated. Well, and as Elizabeth said, my name is Ramiro Cavazos, and I am the president and CEO of the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. I'm also very proud to be a member of the WorkRise Leadership Board and have been now for close to 2 years. I'm delighted to be with you today and to welcome you to the final day of the WorkRise and Partners Charting a Resilient Future for U.S. Workers Conference. Today's theme is really focused on how we as a society can leverage the forces of economic disruption and change and transform them to our advantage, especially so that workers and families of all backgrounds, regardless of their zip code or educational attainment or their ethnic background, can have a clear pathway into the middle class and achieve that American dream. As the leader of the largest network and membership-driven organization that supports our 5 million Hispanic and Latino-owned businesses, our members are very well acquainted with risk and, of course, uncertainty. These 5 million Latino-owned businesses, more than 10% of the businesses in America, were definitely hit hard during the pandemic with everything that's going on and happening today. And they've been staying afloat really through a lot of support, not just from the U.S. Hispanic Chamber, but from many organizations. Latino businesses have always faced disruption, disparities in accessing loans, accessing capacity building, and accessing connections or contracts. And other forms of capital clearly have taken the forefront today as we are more creative and we understand that we need each other more than we ever thought. And this pandemic, in many cases, unfortunately, has widened the unequal access to capital. But because we're more interconnected than we ever thought, we certainly feel that WorkRise is getting us there sooner than later to resolve these issues. In fact, one of the policy priorities of our U.S. Hispanic Chamber has been to ensure parity in accessing the stimulus programs that fully support the needs of our Latino and Hispanic businesses, especially in rural areas and low-income areas of our country. We have, in fact, 260 plus Latino chambers, and each of them has become an emergency room to support our small businesses from around the country. But the resilience of our Latino entrepreneur is also striking. And it also relates to important work of the need for talent acquisition, for job quality for our workers. In fact, a recent study with one of our great partners, the Stanford Latino Business Action Network, and also the Entrepreneurship Initiative, finds that Latino businesses are coming back stronger after the pandemic, and that we're more likely to start tech companies than our other counterparts that are Anglo-owned businesses throughout this country. In fact, surveys have also shown that more than 65 to 70% of our Latino-owned businesses are positive about the future, even in spite of the pandemic and in spite of inflation and other forces at play today. This study has also found that Latino-owned businesses, as compared to non-Latino-owned businesses or Anglo-owned businesses, are more apt to provide employee benefits, such as health insurance, paid holidays, and retirement benefits, in addition to the fact that more Latino-owned businesses employ more Latinos and people of diverse backgrounds because of that cultural affinity and connection. So these benefits are the building blocks of not just of our families, but for creating quality jobs and upward mobility in this country for employees of our Latino business owners. In fact, in our workforce, more than 80% of the growth in the last 10 years throughout America has come from Latinos living in this country. All 62.5 million of them are participating at higher levels and have a median age that's younger than our counterparts. So it's true that when we consider the future state of the American economy, the largest and strongest economy in the world, that we realize we've helped build this economy over the last 300 to 500 years, but now more than ever in 2022, with a workforce being the biggest challenge that we can find, there's much more that we don't know and much more that we can do. And so as you'll hear today, there are risks that are posed not just by the economic forces that I mentioned, but throw in climate change and its impact on all of us and throughout the world. Throw in technological change and the unequal access to the digitalization that's occurring that we need to equalize. And of course, automation is another factor that we need to consider. And our changing demographics, making predictions of the future, and even just fertility rates throughout the world and in this country are at their lowest levels. And as we replace our baby boomers with younger generations, it's become more and more of a workforce challenge because of everything that I've mentioned. But one thing that makes me proud and one thing that we can bank on as a community and through WorkRise and through the efforts that you'll hear today is the ingenuity of entrepreneurs and the visionary leaders that you all represent, both in the public and private sector. You will hear from today many of these leaders during the conference sessions. I invite you to apply to the insights that you hear about today and use them in your communities, in your ecosystems. The form of research or innovative policy or programs that you're working on, please take this information and make it your work, make it our work. Each of us has the power and the responsibility to make sure that all people, regardless of their ethnic background, their status of academic achievement, or what neighborhood they live in, that they each have a chance to live a prosperous life with the quality of life that we deserve. So thank you again for attending the WorkRise and Partners Conference. And with that, I'll turn it over back to Elizabeth to introduce our first panel. And on behalf of the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and your servant, Ramiro Cavazos, it is my honor to be here with you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ramiro. It's now my pleasure to introduce our first panel of the day, which will build on some of the themes we heard yesterday on what employers and companies can do to improve economic mobility for low-wage workers. We'll be looking at this question today from a local government perspective, as well as from the perspective of PolicyLink, which is an advocacy organization working closely with municipalities and corporations on creating greater workforce equity. Moderating this panel will be Sarah Rosen-Wortel, Urban Institute president and a dear friend and champion of WorkRise. And I just want to note for the audience that this session was previously recorded due to busy schedules, but we encourage you to add your questions into the chat. For more than 10 years, Sarah has led Urban, a best-in-class economics and social policy research organization that believes in the power of evidence to improve lives and strengthen communities. Under Sarah's leadership, Urban leverages cutting-edge technology and data science to understand and confront structural racism and deliver timely, relevant, and actionable research to communities, capitals, boardrooms, and wherever innovators are pursuing bold ideas. Sarah, I'll turn it over to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Rosen-Wortel, and I have the great privilege of serving as the president of the Urban Institute and welcome you to this keynote discussion today. Very excited to moderate this opening panel for the third and final day of the Charting a Resilient Futures for U.S. Workers conference hosted by WorkRise with an incredible set of partners. And I want to acknowledge them here, all of those who have helped us to bring this event to life. Organizations, all of our partners are doing important groundbreaking work in supporting the economic mobility of American workers through research, public and private partnerships, and innovative programs and service delivery miles, and all focused also on the questions of equity that we'll be talking about today. So I want to share my thanks to AARP, the Business Roundtable, the Families and Workers Fund, the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, Jobs for the Future, and Rework America Alliance, which is an initiative of the Markle Foundation. I also want to thank and acknowledge WorkRise's funders who have all made this event possible, and a full list of them can be found on our website. So now to the discussion. We're going to talk about the role of local government in creating quality jobs and a more equitable and resilient workforce. Nothing could be more important. Mayors, city councils, workforce and economic development organizations are increasingly seeking guidance on how they can embed equity across all the programs, services, and initiatives that they're delivering, including those focused on creating good jobs with family-sustaining wages, investing in workers and workforce training for high-demand jobs, and building a talent ecosystem that leaves no one behind. We all know, however, that there's real work to do at the local level to dismantle racial inequality in the labor market and in individual industries and workplaces. We know there are still too many jobs in the economy that pay low wages, offer no benefits or job protections, and aren't particularly healthy or safe. And as we'll talk about today, increasingly, too often, these jobs are jobs that for which Black and Latinx workers are steered into lower wage, lower mobility jobs and careers. Unfortunately, occupational segregation is still very much the norm in our economy. So we're excited because we're going to talk about today some folks who are really working hard and can tell us about what city leaders and advocates are doing to create pathways for those low and middle wage workers into the middle class. We have two amazing change makers here with us. First, Mayor Andre Dickens and Dr. Michael McAfee. Mayor Dickens took office as the 61st mayor of Atlanta in January of this year after serving in the city council's at-large seat for 2 terms. So he's had a whole of Atlanta perspective for some time. He's an Atlanta native who was educated in the city's public schools, was an entrepreneur and a nonprofit leader, knows well the workforce system and the labor market of that city, and has been working to realize a bold vision for equity and opportunity for all of Atlanta's residents. So welcome, Mayor Dickens. It's a real honor for us to have you.
Thank you.
Let me also get introductions out of the way, and introduce Dr. Michael McAfee, President and CEO of PolicyLink, a national research and action institute, advancing racial and economic equity by lifting up what works. Michael has led many groundbreaking initiatives at PolicyLinks, including the Promised Neighborhoods and a corporate racial equity tool that provides guidance to private sector companies as they assess and promote equity in every aspect of their value chain, and so many others. And he's a longtime partner of the Urban Institute as well. And so can't imagine 2 better folks to talk about this conversation. Thanks for both of you for being here. So Mr. Mayor, let me start with you, if I may. Atlanta has fared well over the last 4 decades to emerge as a leading hub for the economic activity in the South. You've attracted numerous Fortune 500 headquarters, for example. You also, however, rank at the bottom or near for economic mobility and income inequality for many of your residents, too many of whom are not benefiting from all these great successes. And you've made this addressing economic mobility and equity a central frame for your economic development policies and programs. So tell us a little bit more about how, before we get to solutions, even how you view these challenges and how sort of your underlying theory and strategy for creating better opportunities for Atlanta's residents.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on. And this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. This is the central business of my administration. It's upward mobility, equity, and opportunity. I have to do the potholes and make sure that the grass is cut and make sure that, everybody's paid every 2 weeks. But the main thing that I want to do is make sure that we have a city that works for everyone. So the opportunity to go from poverty to prosperity can happen here, but it doesn't happen for enough people. And so I want to change that. Being a native of Atlanta, the neighborhood I grew up in as a low working class neighborhood, and you're given a 4% chance of making it from that neighborhood to upper middle class. And that's the challenge. So 96% chance of you staying in your birth environment. And so my goal is to provide upward mobility, provide opportunities for everyone in Atlanta. We have thriving companies, businesses, nonprofits. We have these great colleges. We have the Georgia Tech, Georgia State, Emory, the AU Center, SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design. We have some remarkable institutions of higher learning. Of course, we have the world's busiest airport, Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. So economy comes through here. Commerce comes through here. 70% of the world's credit card transactions occur in Atlanta, which is a fintech capital of the United States. But guess what? We still have far too many Atlantans that are left out of that economic activity. They have low wage jobs or no wage jobs. They don't have the pathway and skill set that leads to these middle income jobs and entrepreneurship. So what I've been doing is trying to provide a pathway through technology training, nursing, logistics, where you can get certifications. You can go through certificate programs versus having to go through a 4-year institution, or you can get an associate's degree and then have apprenticeships and internships. So we've really been laser focused on scaling those programs that work and those technical colleges and technical training programs. And most of them have free or low cost, and we're doing supplemental supports for those and trying to broaden the opportunities and push it out into the community so that they can see themselves having these middle wage jobs, and then they can go back to college once they get these skills. So the Tech Bridges of the world, where I used to work, I created a program called a Technology Career Program in conjunction with Tech Bridge and Goodwill. Goodwill has jobs where they get you a job, then a better job, then a career. And some other great programs, Atlanta Technical College and others. We are trying to help scale those programs so that we'll look up, and versus having what some cities have had is a tale of two cities, and they end up not having a middle class. They only have prosperous people, and then everybody else that does the services each day have to get bussed in or have to drive an hour to get in because they can't afford to live in the city. We want to make sure that there's Atlantans that still live here that can continue to live here and have incomes that matter, as well as affordable housing, which is a major part of this. So it's the hard work, it's the heart work. It has to come from your heart to do this work, and to see people as having the self-agency to grow with these opportunities.
Well, you said something that resonates with our hearts here, which is doing what works. And so we're going to come back throughout this next hour and keep focusing on solutions and models and what you're learning as you go. But let me start with you, Dr. McAfee. I want to ask you to reflect a little bit on a big picture question. I'm going to change the order here a little bit. I'll call an audible. I hope you don't mind. So the labor market challenges the mayor just described are not challenges that are equally distributed across our society. As you know better than so many, this labor market is a textbook example of the consequences of our nation's history of racial inequality. So why has inequality in wages, earning, and career advancement persisted, despite the fact that we've now had half a century with anti-discrimination laws, rising levels of educational attainment, all kinds of efforts from the private sector with support from unions, et cetera, and yet today we see these dead-end jobs that the mayor described disproportionately held by Black and brown workers.
Yeah, thanks for asking the question, and Mayor, it's an honor to be with you. The mayor said a couple of things that I think are really important to pay attention to. The first is when your zip code still is the greatest predictor of life outcomes, that's actually not an initiative challenge, that is a design challenge. And when we think about our economy, we've not actually thought about the design of our cities, our democracy, and our economy, where we've actually said to ourselves, I want to lift an entire population up. We don't do that work. And the best example is what you saw happen in the pandemic. We said once again that there is a hierarchy of human value, and that hierarchy is going to be allowed to play out. And for those folks who are poor, you're going to be pretty much left to your own devices. And that has been the posture of this country since its founding, and we have not really dealt with it. You talked about racial equity, Sarah, and even in this moment where we know how critical racial equity is, We're passing laws so you can't even talk about specific populations. Can't say gay. Can't talk about equity. So at the very time where we know we have these design challenges, there is a tension in this nation about what this nation will become and who it will serve. And I don't think, quite frankly, our side has taken serious enough the intentionality with which a few want a very different America, and they're quite comfortable with these outcomes. They're designed in it. Think about how many cities try to increase their minimum wage floors and they can't because of state preemption laws. Think about how many mayors try to increase hiring ratios and can't because of state preemption laws. That is a design challenge. The mayors have been intentionally hamstrung. And so you think about those design challenges and you think about a nation that's founded on slave labor, stolen land, and genocide. We've never really reconciled that. This is ultimately the natural conclusion of it. This is what a nation ultimately looks like when it can't even own its past, but yet we have a desire for a better future. You actually can't get there without the reconciliation that is needed. Now, we can continue to do good things, but good things are acts of charity at this point because the scale is so large. And we need to be able to hold doing those good things and tending to these structural design challenges. You talked about occupational segregation being a huge part of this. The mayor talked about housing segregation being a huge part of these. These are structural phenomena that we can change, but they're going to require us to change our legal and regulatory frames, as well as the way our institutions and their leaders see these people. If you see Black and brown folks as less than, you'll never solve this problem.
Well, Michael, that's a perfect way. I'm glad I asked you the question first to set up the question, both of the intentionality of how we got here, and also then the intentionality of how we address the problem. It's not about just the workforce initiative here or there, but thinking mindfully about the root causes, the origins. So, Mr. Mayor, you've been trying to create workers, wins for your workers in Atlanta, both wins for workers and for employers. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about, and feel free also to jump in on any of the challenges that Michael laid out, but one of the things you did is you created a Department of Labor within the city, which was not something that existed before. Again, talking about being intentional. And how do you imagine that that's going to play out for both the employers in your city and the workers?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like Dr. McAfee said, there's some structural things and poor design that's in place with states and cities that are trying to do, cities are trying to do the best we can for our residents, but we are, cities are creatures of the state. We are creations of the state. And so if the state has a law that prohibits rent control or prohibits, minimum wage, the minimum wage in Georgia is $5.15. So get that. I mean, the national minimum wage is $7.25, so it eclipses ours. But our state has not changed ours because it's making a point that they don't want a minimum wage, right? But you can't live off $5.15 nor $7.25 nor $10. We need a minimum wage that's a living wage, one that works at least $15 an hour. And we were talking about that in 2016 when I, as a council member, made the law that all city employees will be at least at $15 an hour. That was 2016. Here we are now, and I'm trying to move that up to $19 an hour. And it's still only for city employees because the state doesn't allow you to do certain things. So I just wanted to kind of share that. And so when the creation of the Department of Labor, we're actually making an announcement that we're creating it next week. So it's not up yet, but it's on the docket. And I want to create that because, we have a state Department of Labor, and that's where a lot of your unemployment comes from, where you go there to look for jobs when you're unemployed, et cetera. But the city is closer to the people, and the people that we know have the challenges tend to be Black and brown people living in lower income communities. So I want to make sure that we are intentional about providing opportunities for those folks close at home. really getting in and going down in those communities. We have now, we're going to have a van, a bus, I should say, that goes down there to, to the various communities to talk about the jobs that we have, to do fairs, et cetera, and certification training. One of the things that we're also dealing with, the reason why I want to create a Department of Labor is to really encourage and strongly suggest to all of these Fortune 500 companies in Atlanta and all of the business people that you have to make sure that your hiring practices give an opportunity for local talent to succeed. Far too often, these Fortune 500s import their talent from other places because they want the talent to look like their board members, their current leadership. It's this word fit. They're not a good fit. They don't fit. And, that is, when you start looking at what the fit is, that's a lot of assimilation that's required, a lot of acculturation, a lot of, the various human aspects of who you are, your who-ness has to go away in order for me to hire you. And so this Department of Labor is going to be the city's response to that, saying, corporations, you want good corporate citizenship. You have CSR managers. We're not just asking you to come write $1,000 check or $10,000 check for the United Way or some dinner to help some disadvantaged folks for a day. We want you to make part of your business practices to have equity, diversity, inclusion, to have ladders and lattices within the organization so that the individuals that live in this city can work in those tall buildings, those big corporations that are here, and have an opportunity to thrive. And so this Department of Labor is going to be bringing about best practices, because I don't make the assumption that corporations automatically know this stuff. Their bias is sometimes conscious and sometimes unconscious. So we're going to lean in on that and try to be an exemplar and instructive so that the community will continue to be as diverse as Dr. King left it, and not turn into some figment of the imagination of Atlanta that we've never seen before, because all of the housing is too expensive for the incomes that the low-income people are making, because we just a desire for them to stay low income forever. No, there should be opportunities for people to ladder up. So that's why in the middle of my vision statement for the city is that we embrace upward mobility, that we're going to make sure that that is a cause that we are after for everybody. So this Department of Labor will deal with labor unions that work in the city government or don't even work in the city government. They could just be around the city doing, the carpenters union or whatever union that may not necessarily have an office within my office, within the city, but they have workers in the city and they're working on projects and they need to be paid a fair day's wage for a fair day's work.
That's terrific, and I love your point about fit, which is should be a word that is banned in HR practices in my book. It's about what somebody can bring to an organization that adds and challenges and broadens the thinking, not fits in with everyone else. So I love that. Michael, I'm going to ask you in a few minutes about to turn to employers, because I know you have much, but I wanted to maybe give you, the audience, a little bit of grounding in some of the work that PolicyLink has been doing on these sets of employment questions around occupational segregation, workplace discrimination, that really been huge impediments for workers and their families. You lead something called the Advancing Workforce Equity Project. It's an amazing collaboration between PolicyLink and its National Equity Atlas and a lot of great groups, including the National Fund for Workforce Solutions and a data provider, Lightcast. And you've created these really terrific deep dives into the labor markets in a number of cities. Don't tell us if you've done Atlanta yet. I don't think so. Maybe it should be on your list. But you see in these other, I know, give the mayor another tool in his tool belt to go talk to the employers in the area. But can you, at these other cities, tell us a little bit about the trends that you're seeing in the data, both at the national and at the local level? And what is this project kind of giving you hope And how does it also focus the mind on the kind of extent of challenge that is there by design?
One is this notion of occupational segregation. It is still strong, it is real, and we are tracking folks into jobs that are going to be low paying for the entirety of their lives if they don't get new skills. That is just the reality. But in addition to that, I remember a few years ago, I was out, I forget the specific union, but I was out in Las Vegas looking at this campus, state-of-the-art campus of one of our largest unions in this country. And I was blown away by what the union had the capability to do to train folks. And as they were doing a tour with other mayors, the question was asked, well, how are people of color going to have access to this? And it stuck with me because the statement was simply like, yeah, that's something that we're working on. It's hard to find those people. I was just blown away that we're still struggling to act as if we can't find those people today. This is how occupational segregation occurs. You have unions out there, which we know is one of the most direct paths into really high-paying good jobs, and yet the union leaders are still struggling to just drive a couple of blocks across town to a neighborhood where those people live. And so you have these state-of-the-art buildings sitting there where unions are saying we don't even have the next generation of people coming through them. So there is a huge mismatch right there institutionally. Occupational segregation is playing a huge role. Education is playing a huge role. We think that education is the great equalizer. The data in the 9 areas that we looked at says it is not. And in fact, so in many cases, white folks without a degree make more than Black folks with a 2-year degree. So in many instances, you still see when it comes to income, you're not closing the income gap or the racial wealth gap by simply getting an education. So that is in part a fallacy. So I think right there, what we need to begin to think about is, how do we get people to start looking at their own data and start paying equitably? Now, that's some of the struggles, but some of the positive things are, you're starting to see a big trend towards skills-based hiring, which is a really good trend. People are saying, you know what, maybe let's reconsider these degree things, but let's focus on the skill sets that are needed. And you're seeing tech companies move in this direction and have done really good at hiring folks. You're seeing other industries consider the same. People are finally, to the mayor's point, seeing the connection between housing and good jobs as well. These are trends where we're seeing people try to have breakthroughs. So housing connected to opportunity, where people live and work same places. You're seeing skills development be a big deal as another opportunity to hire, instead of just hoping that people have the right paper, but still may not have the credentials to do this work. And we're also seeing folks explicitly create pathways. Think about JP Morgan Chase's Black Pathways, specifically calling that out, not as a way to exclude, but another way to bring more into the organization. And then I sit on the board of REI, the outdoor company, and you see them actually beginning to invest in entrepreneurs of color to create the next generation of products that consumers will use. So these are ways that I'm excited about, because you see corporate America stepping into this space and beginning to do some things, but it's just not at the scale that is needed yet for us to see the numbers go in the right direction.
It's great. So, Mr. Mayor, I want to keep on this theme of the role of employers in trying to create these kinds of opportunities. This is not just, enhance the supply side, but it's the practices that we have to be intentional about. So one of the key things you've been doing is creating this sort of shared expectation for employers and residents that they're going to all play a role in prosperity. I know that SEIU was a key in your area in helping cleaners at the Atlanta airport raise their wages from $8.50 to $12 and $15 an hour. So how are you looking to unions, to employers, and to the role of government to create more opportunities for low wage workers? We've talked a little bit about the wages themselves, but what else is in your tool belt?
Yeah, so I don't ever want to think that government solves all the problems. Government and business and the citizens solve these problems together. And I've come out of the gate saying that there's no S on my chest that's going to, you know, have a magic wand or whatever and just change all these things. But I am going to be very vocal about it, very intentional about it. I'll play the role of connector. And the good news is a lot of businesses say that this is what they want. They want to provide opportunities. They want to be in the equity space. They don't like to see disparities. They are trying to figure out what to do, and they're hiring people internally to try to figure out what to do. And what I'm saying is, let me help you with that. There are people in this community, there are thought leaders, there's businesses, they all can work together to come about these solutions. And so, as you mentioned with SEIU, the union, and just like Dr. McAfee said, listen, unions are one of the most direct pathways to a great paying job and to, you know, stability in your household, and maybe even to the middle class or upper middle class. And so, but at the world's busiest airport with the #1 customer service and the most efficient airport, these folks were being paid $8.50, $9 an hour to clean the airport because they were contract laborers. So as I said, we made $15 an hour minimum wage for city employees, but at the airport and stuff like that, those are on contract. So in the state of Georgia does not allow you to set a minimum wage directly or indirectly for private businesses. So I could not say as an airport vendor, you have to pay $15 an hour. That would be against the state's law. But what I did was go to all the board members, go to the leadership of certain airlines and all these people and say, in this city, we don't want to have the face of the airport, which are the people that's walking around with the brooms and the people that are walking around wiping down stuff and making sure that the bathrooms are clean. When you fly into, there are a lot of passengers flying there. Treat these people like ambassadors, pay them well. Because when you can't make, you know, when you have more month than money, you pick another job and you go broke, and then you can't take care of your kids' childcare, et cetera, et cetera. So I had to make the case in January as the new mayor. I was like, look, you know, I don't want to say airlines, but all these airlines, this is not a good look, especially with record bonuses that y'all have given yourself and your shareholders and all of the above. These hardworking folks deserve a piece of that. So they said, oh, we didn't even know. We had no idea these contractors weren't being paid. Fine, okay, now you know. And so then we upped the contract. And I just gave that example to say that they're not my direct employees, but they are my concern. They occupy housing units, their kids go to schools in our city. So I care about what happens to them. And that's where the Department of Labor idea comes from, which is, yeah, you know, these labor unions, these individuals that work, they matter to the city because, you know, their lives, where they eat, how healthy, what healthy foods they can eat with the limited amount of money that they get. So how's their lifestyle? What's their quality of life? And those things lead to other choices that they make: medicine, childcare, groceries, all these things. So I see it as public-private partnership in this transformation, in this uplift of people. And so we're looking at how to make sure that in the south side of town, how do we get more job centers so that people are closer to work? How do we do more training in those areas? You know, if it's taking you a 40-minute bus ride to be able to get to a train station that then takes you another hour, 30 minutes to get to where you're trying to go to class, well, that's you know, a productivity loss. That may be disinteresting to you because you got to do that each way, and you got to get childcare back here, back there. It ends up being more burdensome for these individuals. So now we're trying to bring things closer and closer to the communities. As was stated earlier by Dr. McAfee, we have housing segregation. So we know where people live. We know where their incomes are dictated. This is where they can live. So we should provide as many amenities and opportunities for them. And the corporations, I'm telling them, you know, some of you are the size of nation states. Your governments, I mean, you're like governments. If you were ranked, you would be on, you know, some scale as a country. So you have to act like a country and take care of people in your environs, in your ecosystem. And so you telling me you can't find talent, that means you're not looking well enough. You telling me you didn't know people were underpaid, or you see some challenges in the school system, and that's why your kids are, that all your executives live here or do this, then that's turning a blind eye. So we're really shining a light on it so everybody sees themselves and the problems together. And it's really producing rewards. It's producing results. Philanthropic dollars are up. We're making the case and people are buying into our training programs that we've instituted. And the last thing I'll say, even with our youth, the 14 to 24-year-old population is so vital. These summer internships that we provided and apprenticeships, we set a goal of hiring 3,000 youth this summer, and about 750 of them were hired with the city, but the other 2,000 were hired by corporations across the city. So the corporations took to my challenge and said, we're going to hire some young people and pay them. And it came out to be on average $16 an hour for high school and college age kids to be able to get a job during the summer. And that kept them busy. It gave them life skills. And it actually, on the thing that a lot of people care about, it kept crime down.
So you raised like 3 topics I want to come back to. One of them is this issue of transit and infrastructure for connecting between where people live and jobs. So I'm going to come back to that. That's a huge area of focus for us. But our friend, Dr. McAfee, has a phrase he uses, talks about the leadership stance. And you just demonstrated, Mr. Mayor, it's about saying that whether I have the line authority or not, the statutory authority or not, I'm gonna take a stance and create a goal to raise the wages of all of these workers. And that's a leadership stance. And you're challenging the employers in your airport and other parts of your city to take a leadership stance themselves. I hope I'm not abusing your expression that you've taught me, Michael. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about what you might put on that list of challenges, Michael, to employers. You started to mention this issue of skills-based hiring rather than degree-based hiring. We know that jobs that often don't need a college degree, yet employers just figure it's a good way to figure out who a good worker is, and they put it on the job description. But major companies like Google and Tesla and IBM and some state governments have even removed these degree requirements for certain high-paying, high-mobility jobs, and instead substituted what is it you need to demonstrate you know how to do. Harvard Business School Burning Glass Institute study estimates that there are probably 1 million jobs that could be open to workers without college degrees over the next 5 years if we were willing to take this stance. So clearly, that's one thing we can be asking of our employers. Is that a trend that's here to stay? And what else do you think we can do to ask employers to shift to more mobility enhancing opportunities for some of the workers we're talking about here?
Well, I think if this nation wants a stable marketplace, it's going to have to do what the mayor is describing. Right now, our politics divides us, but you think about it, 100 million people nearly economically insecure, more than 40 million of them are white. So those structural barriers that are deeply rooted in racial discrimination are even too toxic for white America now. So the mayor wasn't just arguing or advocating for Black folks. He's advocating for all the folks in the city of Atlanta. And this is what people need to understand. When your heart is full of love for everyone, it's not a problem to do what the mayor is doing. He didn't have to have a commission to decide whether he was going to try to support white America, white folks in Atlanta, like the Black folks in Atlanta. It's a very different opportunity when you see the humanity of everyone. We need our corporate leaders to continue to do that as well, to see the humanity of everyone, because if you can't, we'll continue to be divided and we're going to continue to have our democracy fall lower and lower on rankings. And we've already seen what happens to when we have societal unrest in our cities, how our downtowns get destroyed. Well, the reality is if these young people don't have anything to look for, they're not taking this anymore. So you can argue and complain about how they might act out. But the reality is, think about all the things you could have done before it got there. And this is what we're not doing right now. I mean, think about the millions of kids that just need to know that there is a pathway. Think about the way that transforms one's life, the way it allows people to begin to think about how do I get out of that zip code. So we need people to continue to create those opportunities. But we also need corporate leaders to start holding a leadership stance that says that some things will just not be tolerated. The divisiveness, the oppressive ways in which our economies operate, these are things that leaders can begin to speak about right now. Because you can't hold talking about a return on investment and then tell me you're going to let all these structural impediments stand and then think that nonprofits or local government can solve this problem, because we can't by ourselves. It's going to take all three sectors partnering to do this work. So if you really care about a return on investment and want to beat your chest about that as if you're saying something brand new, then you've got to be willing to take on these structural issues. You've got to be willing to take on entire populations and be fanatical about getting an indicator to trend in the right direction for them. That's what we need corporate leaders to do. Now, what I'm really pleased about is this, that, Google showed that it can hire Black folks. Now Google's work is to retain them, because what you're starting to see now is that folks are coming into these corporations, but the environment isn't right. So folks don't want to stay. We all are in a moment where if we could lower our defenses a little, we can see that we all have work to do. I have work to do to make sure folks who identify in different ways feel safe at PolicyLink. Even though we're an equity shop, I still got work to do. So if we all could just stop being frustrated that folks are calling us to be greater than who we are today, you could actually see that, it's nothing wrong with wanting to create the conditions for everyone to belong. Those are actually not the institutions we designed, right? So that is a natural part of the work for our generation. And so what I would continue to invite corporations to do is to say, kudos to corporations who are stepping into this moment. And in stepping into this moment, more is going to be asked of all of us. And that's exactly what this democracy needs. And so I think having this heart that can care, this heart that says, these issues are going to be the downfall of all of us if we don't do something about them structurally. I think will be important for civic leaders to do this. When I was coming up, civic leaders were always talking about how to improve their cities. I think that has fallen off a little bit these days. And our civic leaders are questioning, corporate leaders are questioning whether they have a dog in this fight. Oh, they absolutely do. And in many ways, I think that they're on the leading edge of the equity movement. And I say that because they can bend the legal and regulatory frame to their will. We need them to bend the legal and regulatory frame to help these populations, that 100 million that's being left behind, and to help everyone see their fates as inextricably bound. You can't have poor white America thinking that they do not have a role to play in this, or that this work is not for them. It is. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I would encourage us to do. Lean into what is being called to create institutions where everybody can belong. Raise the floor on what good job quality means and begin to spend the next 20 plus years working towards that. These things won't happen in the short term. This is our generational work, but this is the work for us to do nonetheless.
So many places to go here. So, Mr. Mayor, you put economic mobility at the centerpiece of your approach. And I just want to give you just 2 minutes to respond to some of the framing that Michael has posed here. This idea that economic mobility requires us to be intentional, to dig, to look at the structural barriers that we're seeing. The fact is the inequitable access to economic mobility is as deep a problem as inequitable access to schools and transportation and everything else. It's all one of the same. And yet it is a shared American ambition, a shared American dream that every resident of your city has. So I just wanted to hear a little bit, when you made the choice to articulate that, how is it speaking to your strategy? And then I'm going to ask you to come back and let's talk a little bit about housing and childcare and how central that is to achieving that mobility.
Yeah, so, I'm interested in upward mobility, economic upward mobility, because we've got mobility going in the wrong direction, right? So I want the mobility to be, incomes going up, wealth going up, small businesses, right now in Atlanta, and by the way, Atlanta's great. We have a lot of wonderful things, and so I don't want to just be negative about Atlanta. We just became, listed as Money Magazine's best place in the United States to live, and that feels great. I'm born and raised here, and I plan to continue to lead this city with all my heart. But at the same time, we are really bad at upward mobility. So. And we're also bad about even, Black businesses. We have a lot of them. We're one of the leaders in that. But we have a lot of Black businesses that are solopreneurs. They only have one employee, the person. And most of and I think the average revenue is somewhere around $50,000 a year, whereas white businesses are up in the upper six figures of the $600-some thousand of annual revenue. So we have these mismatches here. And so for me, equity solves a lot of the issues that we're dealing with. When we see homeless people, most of their faces are Black and brown, and they went on the economic mobility downward instead of economic mobility upward. So when people say we have issues with homelessness, or we have challenges in our schools, and we have challenges with crime, or we have challenges with housing dilapidation. All these things are constructs of the results from, downward mobility and a history of redlining, the freeway system being drawn right into Black and brown low-income communities. They literally put the highways right through those communities and separated them. The displacement of people, gentrification, and of course, segregation that occurred. My alma mater, Georgia Tech, all of the first Black people are still alive. I know them. These aren't fairy tales. It's not. We're not talking about people that aren't real. So their descendants are friends of mine. So these things got us here to where we have this disparity, where we have this inequity. And so we have to be extremely intentional, like Michael said, have to be extremely intentional about correcting that, about stating it, naming it, making people aware of it, and then making progress towards changing it. And so what I've been telling corporations is it's not enough to just write that, $500,000 check. Please write the $500,000 check for the things that the nonprofit has asked you for. But that doesn't change the whole landscape. When you are a, $10 billion company, a $500,000 check is a rounding error on a rounding error. It's a small amount. So we really need you to be a part of this upward mobility. If third grade reading scores determine high school graduation, preparedness for college, then we have to go to early childhood education, and we really have to make these families stable. So that's a neighborhood strategy that we have to have. So these neighborhoods need stability, amenities, training, and pathway to college or certification. So speaking that and saying that, and that's coming from the mayor, and it's city council now says it, and corporate leaders. The Chamber of Commerce is now beating that drum. So we're making progress through intentionality, and we got a lot of success stories. We got some people that we can point to that were working at Walmart or working at, driving Uber only. And now they're working at, large corporations making $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 and going back to school at night to make more. Those are the type of stories we like to hear.
All right, I'm going to do a couple speed rounds here on a couple topics, because Mr. Mayor, you just got access to federal resources on a scale for the infrastructure of your city. There'll be dollars for transportation. You have an amazing community, but its geography is big compared to those of us who live in northern cities. You've got a long way for people to go to where those opportunities are. Affordable housing, workforce housing, and transit, figuring out where the people live and where the jobs are going to be. Can we bring those visions together, and what are some of the things that you're focusing on? And I'm going to ask you the same question about affordable childcare. And because key strategy for low-wage workers, especially women, to be able to gain access to the workforce is a huge focus right now on childcare and early education, I know in your city and many others. And again, these conversations on work and childcare and training, can we bring those conversations together? And is it the government's role, employers' role, or all of us together?
Yeah, families need it all. And, we have, the pandemic actually showed us that, these essential workers that work at the grocery store, they have kids too, and their kids need childcare. They need connectivity so they can do their homework and they can do their schoolwork. When it was the pandemic, they need to be connectivity, a device. You need childcare. You need, quality amenities in your community. We are trying to utilize our infrastructure dollars to lift up whole communities. And that also includes, like you mentioned, housing affordability. We're building affordable housing, and we're doing it in a mixed income way. We don't want any more 100% affordable communities where you have a concentration of poverty. We want to make sure we have mixed income where the school teacher, the janitor, and the principal can all live in the same community, and their kids can catch the same school bus, and they all go to the same grocery store. And
that's what the research tells us creates economic mobility, right?
Exactly right. We don't want 100%, low income communities where all of the various things that we saw in the past of the projects, et cetera. But we want to make sure we mix it up, 30 and 30, 30%, 30%, 33, where you have some super low income, some middle, some workforce, and then some market rate. You always want to have some market rate in there. So we're doing that. We're building those, and we have a lot of developers. And in Atlanta, one of the things that we do is we make sure we have disadvantaged business enterprises. We created that here with the great Maynard Jackson, the historic mayor. And this program that requires minority or female business enterprises to participate in the development. The other thing that we want to make sure that we have is childcare, as we talked about. So that's why I'm investing in early childhood education. The city of Atlanta is making its first investment in childhood education ever, because our school system deals with the education of kids, but this administration believes that what happens in infancy matters. The words that parents are using, the exercise that kids are doing, the language, the various social building blocks of community is done in those quality childcare centers. So we're helping make sure that employees and families are able to start sending their kids to quality childcare centers. And on the south side of town, where some of the childcare centers don't look good, the environment, you wouldn't want to send your kid there. So a lot of people are just sending them to grandma's house, but grandma is not an educator, so we're trying to help improve the facilities at some of these disadvantaged communities areas by incentivizing and giving them direct construction improvement money. So we're about to start those things. Last thing I'll say is one other area that we are investing in is parks. And we want to make sure people have within a 10-minute walk, 10-minute walk to a quality park, because people need outlets. We want to make sure that folks are able to get fresh air and enjoyment. It may not seem like an infrastructure item, but parks really are a part of the social fabric of a community.
Oh, that's a great list. So Michael, we're coming to the end of this, and I want to ask you really about a critical piece that's underlay all this. The mayor can use his bully pulpit and bring city resources, but in the relationship between an employer and an employee, it is also about bargaining power. We're in a unique labor market. We may not be in this unique labor market for that much longer. So are there ways that we can be intentional about strengthening the bargaining power for Black workers in the labor market, for workers of color in Atlanta and around the country? And what, how does an employer think about that question? What can we be asking of our employers too, whose customers and workforce are increasingly looking for employers who demonstrate in the workplace the kind of equity that you described to help them retain workers?
Well, it's going to happen one way or the other. This generation is saying, you know what? We're going to use our power to organize and to unionize. And I often then hear CEOs lament the fact that folks are taking a union action. Well, the reality is caring for folks was always on the table if that's what we cared about. So in many instances, it's like, don't be surprised because folks are finally saying enough is enough, right? The mayor just told you, even if you're making $15 an hour, it's hard to live in most zip codes in the United States if you're working 2 jobs. So if these are the conditions that we're going to let stand, CEOs can be startled. We can make practical decisions. I make a practical decision that I'll never make 5 times more than the lowest paid person in my organization. And that lowest paid person must make a living wage in that city. You see, leaders are already authorized to make choices. They're already authorized. They don't need any more permission, no more task forces. They're already authorized to do something. The question is, will we? So what you're seeing happen in so many instances is workers are simply saying, you know what, I'd rather hustle than take this demeaning job where you don't respect me anyway. So you wonder why you can't find workers? Just go talk to them. All I gotta do is talk to my family members. They'd rather work Uber and be in the gig economy and do it on their own way than complaining that you won't even let them go take off to take their baby to the doctor. So they're using their leverage to say, no, thank you, these jobs, I'll pass on them. That's one way. Another way is you're gonna see folks unionize, and that's gonna continue to increase. So I think those are huge ways in which people are exercising their power. Now, the last thing I would say is, corporations are stepping into this moment, and that's why at PolicyLink, we're creating corporate racial equity standards. For us, our job now is to continue to provide that North Star to know that if you really want to lean into corporate racial equity, how do you do it at the highest level? And that's what these corporate racial equity standards that we're creating with Just Capital, B-Lab, and FSG is all about, is providing that North Star for the next 20 years for corporations to step into this work.
That's great. All right, Mr. Mayor, we're coming to the end. I'm going to ask you to give a piece of advice, a good idea, a solution to a mayor in another city and one to an employer in your own. What do you think they should do to improve the opportunity for workers to have good jobs and to make them attract and retain Michael's workforce that is asking for more?
Yeah, I would go, first thing is to sit with your HR and then every hiring manager and look at all the job descriptions, and everywhere it says a bachelor's or master's required, critically assess whether that's true today or for the future. If there are certification programs out there that can get this worker to do the same things, then eliminate that, because that there's the cost of college is so high right now that you are precluding a huge amount of people from working for you because a lot of people can't even afford to go to college. So taking off, so hiring managers, et cetera, really critically looking at these job descriptions. And then some of these job descriptions that say 5 to 7 years experience required in this field. One time I had to I'm in technology. That's what I did before being mayor. I had to boldly tell one employer, you have down here 5 to 7 years. This platform wasn't even around 7 years ago. I mean, this version of it, you want them to do Salesforce this or that, or you want them to know AWS in this way. I'm like, wait a minute, let me think about this. I know when this was created. This was created 5 years ago. So you're only going to have so many people. So why don't you let folks that, why are you creating barriers? Just so that you can weed out. No, you should be inclusive. And then I would say corporations should become have onboarding packages and training that matters. Once you have I think all three of us could go to any corporation with a little bit of training and do just about any entry-level or mid-level job. If you got the right training, we have the right mindset, we work hard, we'll figure it out, right? I think that's the case for most people when you really boil it down. So I think that if employers stop being so high-minded about themselves, that we are so special that we have this opportunity, and start looking at it like, well, I learned on the job some things, and whatever my college degree was in, I still had to learn this job when I got here. So let's do that thing on entry-level talent. What's cool about it is every time I've had someone get into a good job, they soar after that. They just got to get into the game. Otherwise, they're locked out forever. So I would say employers, do that part. And then if you don't know how, work with a local agency, a nonprofit, a think tank, hire some consultants that really know how to help you do that kind of work. But in a lot of major cities like Atlanta and others, we are developing pathways that we're making corporations listen and look to those type of pathways so that they can have, if you are paying headhunters, recruiters, 20% on the dollar to find a person, why not grow your own talent pool? And you can do that for less.
Well, I love that, and it's a perfect way to end. One of my great mentors and advisors is essentially speaks the same way, Dr. Freeman Hrabowski. Dr. Hrabowski always spoke about what was wrong with so much of our educational system, that it had this sort of idea that somehow they were supposed to be weeding out talent. And instead, we need to be growing in talent. And you're essentially making the argument that employers need that same mindset. We can take and create the next great workers for you. And we can do that and take advantage of all of this talent, including talent of color that we've tried to keep away through highways and through job qualifications and all of the other barriers that we've been talking about today. How do we instead find ways to help these workers overcome those barriers and become the great workforce that's going to help your company, your region succeed? And taking a look at the work of Policy Link and the work you're doing, Mr. Mayor, in the city of Atlanta, one good place to start. Here at WorkRise, we are so pleased to have had you for this conversation. Please, thank you very much. And we look forward to continuing this work together.
Thank you.
Take care, both of you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, y'all. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Sarah. Before introducing our next panel, we'd like to engage you, our audience, in a brainstorming exercise. So we'd love for you to share your thoughts on what solutions or policies seem most promising to you when it comes to creating strong pathways for economic mobility for workers. And you can put your answers right in the chat. We'll put the question in the chat as well. So now we're going to turn to the question of whether, as a society, we can channel and mobilize the disruptive forces of change and risk into something new and better for workers. We're already seeing some progress in many of these areas. For example, investment in renewable energy has accelerated significantly since 2020. And domestically, new government spending in clean energy and climate resilience infrastructure has the potential to create millions of jobs. But many questions remain. Will these be quality jobs? Who will benefit? Can these investments reduce inequality, or will systemic disparities remain? Our next panel will be exploring the various risks and rewards posed by climate, as well as technology and other global trends. And to moderate this panel, we have someone who's dedicated her career to understanding how we can fix inequities in the labor market, housing, and education. Kristen Brody is Senior Economist and Economic Advisor and Director of the Economic Mobility Project at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. Prior to the Chicago Fed, Kristen served as a fellow at the Brookings Institute, and she's also a lecturer at Spelman College. Kristen, I am delighted to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for that warm welcome and introduction. Now we're going to engage a group of scholars and practitioners on the question of we as researchers, policymakers, employers, and advocates, how can we work together to create a more resilient labor market, one where risk and uncertainty can be turned into opportunities that power workers' economic mobility? Speakers, as I introduce you, please turn your cameras on. I'm going to start with Alexander Bartik, is an assistant professor of economics at the University of Illinois at Champaign. Michelle Holder is a distinguished resident fellow at the Washington Center for Equitable Growth. Carl Van Horn is the director of the John J. Heldrick Center for Workforce Development at Rutgers University and a WorkRise grantee. Jason Walsh is executive director of the Blue Green Alliance, a nonprofit that unites labor unions and environmental organizations to solve today's environmental challenges in ways that create a clean, thriving, and equitable economy. I'd like to welcome all of you. And so I'd like to start by asking each of you, what is the greatest long-term threat to workers' economic opportunity that demands immediate attention from policymakers, employers, advocates, and other decision makers, and why? I'll start with Carl and then go to Michelle, Alex, and Jason.
Hey, thanks, Kristen. Good to be with everyone. I'm sure we could all talk at great length about that, so it's a tough way to narrow down what's the greatest threat. But as I think about the overall economy, I think the thing that concerns me the most is the disinvestment in the training and improvement of workers by employers. So in other words, we still invest a lot of money in preparing people for work, and some people succeed and some don't. And there are more things we could do on that end. But when people get jobs, employers, we see the trends, they're spending less and less money. They're putting more and more of the burden on learning on the individual. And of course, if they have money or time, maybe they can do that, but most people don't have either. And so I'm really concerned about that. And then the public workforce system is in no way at this point prepared to fill that gap. There's once you either stop out or complete a formal education, then you're on your own. So I'm really concerned about that because that is the way that we will end upward mobility, economic opportunity for people who don't succeed in the first place, who aren't born with a silver or gold spoon in their mouth. So to me, that's the biggest overarching concern of disinvestment in employers, treating workers, treating them as disposable commodities, and then a public workforce system that's inadequate to answer that challenge.
Michelle.
Thank you, Dr. Brody. I'd like to thank the Urban Institute as well, WorkRise, and particularly Elizabeth Jacobs for inviting me to participate in this really important conversation. So from my perspective, the greatest long-term threat to workers' economic opportunity has really been the decades-long erosion of worker power and how long and how much effort it will take to regain some measure of discernible worker power. We've seen this in the form of declining unionization rates in this country over the last few decades, though it does seem that there is renewed interest in unionization, particularly in the retail sector, for example, Amazon and Starbucks. Flat worker wages that have only recently seen a boost, given our recognition of the critical role of essential workers during the pandemic. A federal minimum wage of $7.25 per hour that has remained at that level for the last 13 years. And mind you, only 30 states have a minimum wage above $7.25 an hour, with the remaining 20 states having a de facto minimum wage of $7.25 per hour. I can tell you, if you have a hypothetical family of 3, 2 parents, 1 child, and one of the parents is working full-time, the income of that family, according to federal guidelines, puts them below the poverty level. And it is these kinds of workers that we call the working poor, a term which should not be part of our everyday language, from my perspective. Over the last few decades, corporate profits in the US have been buoyed by increasing productivity coupled with stagnant wages. Even in the middle of a pandemic, corporate profits totaled over $3 trillion in 2021. In the same year, full-time workers' annual median earnings was nearly $52,000. While the median salary does represent a modest increase for workers from previous years, it really pales in comparison to the soaring corporate profits we still see today. So what does this all suggest? Wages haven't kept up with productivity and profits. I'm sorry, wages have not kept up with profits, which has led to a widening productivity wage gap. This is one area I see the need for increased worker power and unionization coming into play. Being able to collectively bargain for pay transparency, for example, can help mitigate pay gaps that disproportionately affect women and people of color. Insofar as research has demonstrated pay transparency can lead to greater gender pay equity. For me, if there's a lesson to learn from the pandemic, is that increased unionization and a strong labor movement is needed quite urgently.
Thank you. Alex?
Before I start, thanks so much for having me. I mean, I'm going to take a little bit of a cop-out almost, but I think it's actually something that's conceptually important to think about. And, in addition to, I think, the really, important concerns that Carl and Michelle raised, I think there's a bunch of potential long-term challenges about which there's a lot of uncertainty. There is kind of uncertainty about, the kind of medium-term macroeconomic environment and the extent to which the really tight labor markets, which have actually given, some workers more power, as Michelle was talking about, is gonna continue. I think there's substantial uncertainty about how technological changes are going to affect different types of workers. And I think there's substantial uncertainty about how the increasing relevance of remote work is going to affect different types of workers. So I think in addition to the challenges that Carl and Michelle mentioned, I think it's important for policymakers to think about kind of what I would call like robust policy or robust frameworks. And that, like, you can't necessarily focus on one problem because there's a lot of uncertainty going forward. And so we need to think about policies that are going to be valuable to us in different circumstances that might not be what we expect, right? And second, we need to have like a suite of policy tools we're thinking about, some of which we might never use because the circumstance we designed them for doesn't come into play, but we just can't have a toolkit that's designed for kind of one world, because I think, as the last, 5 to 15 years has demonstrated, there might be a lot of things that happen that we don't expect. So I would kind of really encourage people to focus on kind of robust policy design and thinking about what different policy tools would do in a variety of circumstances that we might end up in as a labor market.
Thank you. Jason?
Thanks, Dr. Brody. I'm going to enthusiastically echo Michelle and drill down a little bit. I think that the greatest long-term threat is the very low rate of union representation among America's workers. So we're now at roughly 6% of the private sector workforce and 10% of the overall workforce represented by unions. The most immediate consequence of this is that relatively few workers have the ability to collectively bargain with their employers for better wages and benefits and working conditions. And those that can are negatively impacted in various ways by the drag created by lower wages and benefits of the non-union workforce. And the effects of that have played out in various and damaging ways: in stagnant wages, in income inequality, in the astonishing and ever-growing gap between the median wage of the typical CEO and the median wage of the typical worker. And I'd even argue in the erosion of faith in our democracy by working people. There's also a policy effect, given that unions are really the only organized political constituency representing workers in this country. The decline in unionization has also resulted in weakened advocacy with policymakers in support of worker interests, and fewer policymakers who feel beholden to worker interests. And it has become kind of an unvirtuous cycle, if you will.
Thank you so much, all of you. I want us to turn to climate. So as governments and international organizations intensify their focus on the number of green and renewable jobs in the economy, how can governments make it easier for people to transition to green intensive industries? And how can we ensure this transition to a green economy is equitable? I'll start with you, Jason.
Thank you. That is a good and very complex question to answer. Let me speak to one part of the question, which is how to make it easier for workers who have lost jobs or may lose jobs in fossil energy sectors as they transition or try to transition to clean energy industries or any industries that allow them to support themselves and their families. Sometimes this is referred to as just transition. And I'll make 3 quick points. First point, a transition that is truly just to workers doesn't happen organically. It will only result from deliberate policy choices that directly support impacted workers. Every major economic shift, I'd argue, of the past 50 years in the US has been manifestly unjust for American workers because policymakers have not crafted a response that is fair or effective. This is happening again, unfortunately, in the energy sector. Tens of thousands of fossil energy workers have lost their jobs over the last decade, and with few exceptions, they have not found jobs in new emerging clean energy industries. In fact, have had difficulties finding jobs in any industry that pays close to the wage of the job that they lost. Because, and this is my second point, in the US, we do not have public policies and programs in place to adequately support workers who are dislocated from their jobs in any sector. And in the energy sector, this has created enormous economic hardship among workers who have already experienced layoffs, coal miners, workers in coal-fired power plants, more recently workers in oil refineries. What these jobs have in common is that they are or were often union jobs and are or were among the best paid jobs in a particular community. And so what these workers need is something they don't currently receive from our existing system, which is an income support and benefits bridge that is long enough to get them not just to any new job, but to a new career that allows them to support their families. Without that, retraining, which is enormously important, but sometimes offered as panacea, becomes kind of a triage process, right? Of finding the shortest term training program that you can complete and get a job before your unemployment insurance runs out, which in most states is 6 months. Third and final point, for this transition to be just for workers, we have to enact policies that ensure that the jobs created in new clean energy sectors are high quality jobs, and that the workers in these sectors can organize into unions if they so choose. And we need policies to target investment to create clean energy jobs in parts of the country, let's take Appalachia as an example, that are hit hardest by the decline of fossil energy jobs. Right. To date, not enough of the new jobs that have been created in sectors like wind and solar are high quality. Not enough of them are being created in fossil reliant communities. That's about to change thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act, which we can talk about in a little bit.
Thank you. I like your point about not just a new job, but a quality job and making sure that there's time for people to get the training for it. Michelle, I'll turn to you.
Thank you, Kristen. There isn't much more I feel like I can add to what Jason just said. I think he really kind of hit the ball out of the park in terms of what is really needed here. I think the only thing that I would add is, I do believe that government investment is critical, particularly in incentivizing consumers to use more renewable sources of energy. And this particular point I'm about to make is directly related to what Jason just said, which is, where consumers go, businesses go, and where businesses go, they will seek workers. So when we talk about ensuring that workers, in non-renewable sources of energy, right, still have livelihoods in their future, we need to make sure that there are jobs for them, that they are trained for. Now, I think a really great model, coming back to my point about government investment, a really great model of government investment in green energy technology, was proposed in the now, as we all know at this conference, Build Back Better legislation, including rebates and tax credits to families who switch to green energy, as well as Built in America clean energy technology, creating hundreds of thousands of jobs. But fortunately, as Jason alluded to, in the Inflation Reduction Act, a lot of these proposed investments in clean energy survive. Though much to the dismay and disappointment of many of us at this conference, all of the care-related provisions in BBB did not survive once it morphed into the Inflation Reduction Act. So I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex?
Yeah, I want to follow up on one of Jason's point, which I think was really great, and is I think an area where we still need to do some experimentation to get it right, but it's something we definitely need to improve relative to previous transitions. So Jason described the need to kind of create policies and institutions that help workers in fossil fuel industries, or other kind of industries are on the downward trend, transition to new green jobs, right? And it's something I think a lot of people recognize, like, did not happen in the scale and effectiveness as it should have, with kind of the kind of decline or change in some traditional manufacturing jobs, right? And so we actually had a program that was designed to do that, called Trade Adjustment Assistance. And there is actually some evidence that for some people that actually, for people who are actually able to get into it, and some people who used it, it actually had some pretty beneficial effects, but take-up was overall very low, right? And so there was a specific policy designed to help that, but take-up was very low. And I think there's I think it's important to try to think about, can we design a new institution to try to fill that same role for the green transition, but actually design one that actually has very high take-up, right? Maybe it needs to be a better program. Maybe there needs to be kind of more generous financial assistance while people are receiving it, but kind of can we take kind of the idea of TAA, that we know that there's some type of transition that's happening, apply it to this new transition that's happening, but also like make a better version, right? Because there were a lot of, although there's some positive studies of it, there were a lot of limitations, and overall take-up was quite take-up and expenditures on it were not that high overall. So I think that's like a really interesting area that I think we need to both make policy efforts, but also try to learn from both some of the successes, but some of the limitations of actually like related policies we tried to implement in the past.
Thank you. Carl?
What I'd add to what's already been said is we can think about different structural policies that would encourage people and provide tax advantages to them for saving, those who can save on their own, to train them, to retrain themselves. So there's something called lifelong learning accounts, which has been introduced various times in Congress and didn't go anywhere. State of New Jersey has just started such a program under Governor Phil Murphy. Some other states have experimented with that, but it really can help people prepare for that on their own, because in many cases they will be on their own. Give them an opportunity to retrain in areas they want to retrain in. The other is to reimagine and reinvent unemployment insurance. Right now, it discourages people from getting trained. It actually penalizes people if they drop out or stop out of the labor market to get training in many cases, because the idea is they're supposed to be ready for work. They have to report to work immediately. And again, that encourages them to take any job that's available rather than one that they may need to sustain themselves and their family. And it gets back to the fact that unlike some of our other advanced industrial countries, we spend almost nothing on this process. We assume, again, it's a classic case of just individualizing risk and not having a corporate risk or a societal risk and bearing that to help people make the transition. That hurts our economy in the long run, as well as individuals. Now, I will also say that's a long road to get there because we've actually been going in the opposite direction. Both parties have been less and less interested in these issues, I'm sorry to say. Maybe climate change is one that will help wake people up because it's not just a fossil fuel industry, it's automotive, it's everywhere, it's construction and so on and so forth. It's an existential change and threat to our economy. So that may change, but right now, I think we are running way behind our OECD members, and I'm sorry to say it puts us, I think, at a disadvantage as well as hurting our workers.
Thank you. I think in agreement with part of what you said, Airman Stevens, right, about learning opportunity credits. It's a proposal that could be used to help retrain workers that that the audience can think about. Jason, I'd like to get a bit more specific with you. The recent Inflation Reduction Act has a lot of potential to create millions of jobs in creating sustainable infrastructure in highly unionized industries. So a win for both green jobs and for quality union jobs. What needs to happen so that the IRA can deliver on its promise?
Well, I love that question. So first, you're right. The IRA has the potential to create millions of jobs. My organization commissioned analysis by the Political Economy Research Institute at UMass Amherst, which estimates that the $369 billion of investment in the Inflation Reduction Act, and then the private sector investment it leverages in sustainable infrastructure, in clean energy, in manufacturing, in environmental programs will create an estimated 9 million jobs over the next decade. That's a hell of a lot of jobs. It's consistent with other analysis showing that the clean energy economy is actually more labor intensive than the fossil fuel economy. And I think it's important to highlight that in the context of this discussion. I'll give just two quick examples. In the power sector, we are manufacturing and installing the sources of our fuels rather than burning them. That creates more jobs on net. In the building sector, energy efficiency turns wasted energy into work. That creates jobs where none existed otherwise. In addition, this job creation will be in industries like the utility and construction and manufacturing sectors, which I wouldn't call highly unionized. I wish I could, but where union density and wage rates are higher than the private sector average, and where the majority of the workforce does not require a 4-year college degree. These are largely blue-collar jobs, blue-collar workers who have been on the hurting end of bad policies and bad labor market trends for the last several decades. So we believe the Inflation Reduction Act, and to a lesser extent, but still important extent, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the CHIPS Act actually represent an industrial policy approach to policymaking, which this country's battered working class is positioned to benefit from enormously. But that promise will only be realized if we pay close attention to the issues of job quality, job access, and worker rights in the implementation of this legislation. So on job quality, we were able to include some key labor standards in the Inflation Reduction Act. The biggest investment flows in the IRA will move through the tax code. And for the first time, labor standards for construction jobs are attached to clean energy tax incentives, which is a very big deal. These are not silver bullets, but they're important. So there's a prevailing wage standard that must be met by tax filers who are often developers to draw down the full value of these tax credits. That will create a wage floor for these projects, and it will allow union contractors to bid for contracts competitively. which will drive up job quality in the solar and wind and other clean energy sectors, which are some of the fastest growing in the country. There are also registered apprenticeship utilization requirements, which leverage a system of 1,600 training centers across the country that are run by the building trades and their employer partners, which is supported by about $1.5 billion of private sector investment annually. If this system were a 4-year degree granting institution, it would be the largest in the country. These apprenticeship requirements get that system into this sector and will allow people to work on projects and earn while they learn and turn these jobs into middle-class careers. In addition, these joint apprenticeship programs have worked for years to develop what's sometimes referred to as a construction careers pathway model, right? Which is typically part of a large a project labor agreement on large construction projects, which develop a workforce pathway or pipeline that starts with pre-apprenticeship programs, usually run by community-based organizations that recruit and train people from local communities to qualify for entry, and it's a high bar for entry, into registered apprenticeship programs, with an emphasis on workers who have been underrepresented in the construction industry. And in that industry, that is particularly true with women and with Black Americans. There is a track record of this model leading to a more inclusive and skilled and stable workforce. And that's really going to be essential. The only way we realize the full equity promise of these investments is if we pair job quality with job access. We do not, unfortunately, have analogous job quality levers in the roughly $50 billion of clean manufacturing investments in the IRA. So there is a danger that those public investments will go to manufacturers who've been part of a decades-long trend of driving down wages and benefits for workers in the manufacturing sector, which typically involves locating manufacturing facilities in anti-union parts of the country where policymakers are often actively hostile to the interests of working people. Nonetheless, we have a strong ally in the Biden administration, and as federal agencies begin to implement the IRA, we are working with them to push investment along a high road rather than to low road projects.
Thank you very much. So I want to pose this question to Carl and Jason. As the economy shifts towards green jobs in existing and even wholly new industries, how can we ensure that the skills, training, and education infrastructure is there to train workers for climate jobs of tomorrow? I feel like we've discussed some of this, but would either of you have anything else to add?
I'm going to let Carl take the first crack at that one.
I think a lot's already been said, but I guess what I'd add is that it's important to hold the education and training establishment accountable for the training and education programs they provide. In other words, there is both in the public and the private sector training world, a lot of slapdash, I wouldn't say fraudulent, but certainly poorly designed training programs that purport to provide opportunities for people, but there's no evidence they're actually doing that. So we have to rely upon states that are willing to take that lead in providing some consumer protection and accountability and quality control. Some states do that. New Jersey's very strong in that, I'm happy to say. We have an eligible training provider list, and it's public information. If you don't perform, you can no longer get public funds. So there needs to be visibility to individuals about that, because there's a lot of false hope that people get because it's a nice fancy building and they think it's an opportunity. And by the way, it's not just the, we used to call the storefront fraud group, but it's also some big institutions that create programs because they're driven by the same incentive everybody else is, which they got to bring dollars in, right? So I think one of the best ways to ensure that, in short, is consumer protection and visibility to individuals about what the training will actually deliver and will it deliver what they're claiming it does.
Thank you.
So I think it's a really good question. I'll make what might sound like a contrary point, which is not to what Carl just said, but this sort of this notion of green jobs. And I confess, I'm part of like the first wave of green jobs evangelism, so I have some experience here. I think while there are some new skills and new occupations created in the transition to the clean energy economy, for the most part, we're looking at existing skills and existing occupations that are deployed for new economic activity and new technologies. Right? So the electrician who helps install a utility scale solar farm is the same worker with largely the same skill set who built a combined cycle natural gas power plant, right? The CNC machine operator in a manufacturing plant making oil drilling equipment is the same operator using the same skills to make components for a wind turbine. There are some examples of entirely new occupations like solar installer or wind turbine technician, but those are exceptions rather than the norm. And I emphasize this because I think there's sometimes an impression that we need to create a wholly new infrastructure of education and training programs for the clean energy transition, which I don't think we need to do. And I think that's a good thing because our existing education and training systems are deeply under-resourced and in many cases inadequate. And we need to pay attention to them. And since I've spent some time talking about all the good things in the Inflation Reduction Act, I think it's important to say that one of its failures, and Michelle talked about another one, which is the disappearing investment in care economy workers, is that the final version didn't include billions of dollars for workforce development, right, which was included in the House passed Build Back Better Act last year. I talked about the dislocated energy workers. We tried to get a whole system of supports looking to the Trade Adjustment Act for some inspiration, but also for some lessons. And by the way, that program has expired because Congress has not reauthorized it, just to make that note. And we were not able to get robust supports for dislocated energy workers into the legislation. So we got a lot of work to do on this front.
Thank you. Michelle, I want to turn to you. We know that climate change and natural disasters affect communities disproportionately and unequally. Recent hurricanes in Puerto Rico and Florida offer a stark reminder of this. How might climate change affect the geographic distribution of jobs? And what can be done to better connect workers to where jobs are or where new industries are emerging?
Wow, this one is a tough one for me to answer, honestly, because I have to admit that green jobs and climate change is a bit outside of my wheelhouse. So I'm going to have to pass on this question.
Alex?
I mean, to some extent, this kind of fits with my first answer because I think, although, we have some suggestions that like, obviously some low-lying coastal areas are going to be very affected. There's also just like a lot of uncertainty. I mean, like the climate models have a lot of uncertainty. There may be some places that are nowhere near the coast. They're going to have more extreme weather events. So I think we kind of need a general policy environment with like a lot of, because I think there is a lot of uncertainty about where is like exactly how the impacts are going to shake out. But that being said, I think there's a couple of things to think about. One, and this is really not on the labor market policy side, it's on the housing market policy side, is like if there are going to be big shifts in where people are able or interested in living, you need to be able to accommodate that in a relatively rapid fashion. And for a variety of reasons, the U.S. has not been particularly good over the past 3 or 4 decades at building a lot of housing rapidly. And there's a variety of reasons for that. I mean, some having to do with regulatory constraints in some places, some having to do with, I think the kind of lack of investment and growth in the manufactured housing industry, which has a lot of potential to build a lot of housing fast. So I think thinking about how we can make housing, and also in some cases, a public investments in kind of building housing too. And so I think thinking about how we can make housing investments more feasible and happen faster, I think is going to be important, because like there are going to be people who are going to be dislocated from various places who are going to have to move to new places, right? And that's going to be, and we're going to have to maybe accommodate that more rapidly than we normally do. And I think that's something we've been actually pretty bad at over the past 30 or 40 years, and that's going to have, there's going to be some opportunities there too. I mean, there's going to be potentially a bunch of construction jobs, building these housing or kind of different kinds of housing in new places, but we need to have, we need to kind of make that feasible. So that's one thing. The second things are kind of, possibly federally funded, because I think states are going to be hesitant to do this themselves, but like possible programs for people who are in areas that look like they're going to have persistent climate related challenges, programs to maybe provide people funds and assistance in figuring out where might be a good fit for them to move to. I mean, I think it's going to have to be, it's probably federally funded because it's, for very understandable reasons, no state wants to help its residents move somewhere else if it's outside the state. But I think possibly for certain targeted areas, programs to help people figure out if they're somewhere in the same area where they can stay, or if they need to move someone else due to persistent climate challenges. Those are kind of like the two biggest things I would think of off the top of my head.
Thank you. So the last question that I'm going to ask before I go to an audience question is one that I feel like is based on my research and that I could probably answer as well, but I'm gonna pose this to you. Research, including my own, suggests that up to 30% of all work hours globally could be automated as soon as 2030 using technology that already exists today. And technology is evolving at an exponential pace. We know that automation is changing the shape of opportunity in the US labor market already, but it's inequitable. We know that it's affecting people by race differently. So how can policymakers, employers, and workforce practitioners ensure that automation results in equity and opportunity rather than widening disparities? I'll open it to whoever wants to go first on that one.
I'll go first on that one, Kristen, since I passed on the last one. So what I would say about that is, not to poo-poo, right, the issue of technological change and automation, but really the problem of automation and the threats it can pose to workers is really something we faced and continually wrung our hands about since probably the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Automation has been and is a permanent feature of our economy. And one thing we continue to see is that even as some jobs become obsolete due to automation, other jobs and occupations can arise that don't necessarily or exactly take the place of the old jobs, but they do present new opportunities, something that Jason mentioned when he was talking about the obsolescence of some jobs in non-renewable energy. In order to ensure that new opportunities which can arise as the result of automation is equitably distributed across geographies and demographies, we have to ensure that equipment and training that is required to keep pace with new technologies has wide accessibility, such as, for example, closing the so-called digital divide between rural versus urban areas by investing in necessary tech infrastructure in rural areas. This is an area that I think is ripe for public and public-private partnerships that can present mutually beneficial outcomes, which would instigate the ability of more workers and more consumers to engage in local economies, increasing both business revenue and local and state tax revenue. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. Carl, please chime in.
Sure, I agree with what Michelle said, and I'd like to add a different angle on this. What I'm concerned about, among other things, is the exploitation of workers in the automation process because of the ability of employers to survey and monitor everything that the workers do, especially at the low end. the proliferation of, which will happen, of wearable devices that allow employers to monitor everything people are doing, every keystroke, every movement. So it's not just in warehouses, it's in all sorts of other places. So I think we need to be concerned about protection, human protection and safety, but in particular, invasion of privacy. And so that's part of what goes along with automation, is invasion of people's space, put simply. So that's one area I'm concerned about. I'm also concerned about the fact that what automation will hit first is the low-wage workers that are already disadvantaged to begin with. So, the restaurant industry is rapidly changing as people move, as restaurateurs move the business of ordering food to the customer as opposed to someone in between them. It's called a waiter, a waitress, wait person, whatever you want. So those jobs will quickly disappear as restaurants figure out they can make more money without that intervening workforce. So there's a lot of things that I think both social justice questions, but also privacy and safety questions that we need to attend to, rather than that makes this different than other changes that Michelle is referring to. Some similar, but many really different.
Alex, I want to come to you quickly. We're almost out of time, and I want to ask one of these audience questions, but I will turn to you before I do so.
I'll make my 2 points very quickly on this. Although I definitely agree with Carl about what's going on with restaurant workers, I think there actually is a lot of uncertainty about how automation is going to affect different parts of the labor market. I actually think a lot of the technological developments with large language models could actually displace more high education jobs than low education jobs in some scenarios. So I think, I think how exactly that evolves, I think, is a really an interesting and open question. The second thing is, I think sometimes people treat technological development as like a fixed thing of the world that policy has no control over. And I think that's not necessarily true, that like our tax and transfer system can have an effect, right? And our research investment dollars that the federal government spends and the state government spend can have an effect about what technologies are developed. And there's some recent work by Acemoglu, Manera, and Restrepo trying to think about, does the US tax code actually favor automation and how certain types of capital and equipment investments are treated versus labor, right? And so I think, now it's complicated how to do that well, how to solve that well is a very complicated problem, but I think it's important not to necessarily take kind of exactly where technology will go as like a fixed feature. It's something that policy can and does influence in some circumstances.
So I guess it's interesting. We do know automation risk scores. My research has focused on that, but it's like, just because a job can be automated doesn't necessarily mean that it will be. I want to ask one more question about a job that is low paid, but also not at risk of being automated. Michelle, I'm going to start with you on this one. So the pandemic put the care economy front and center, including the critical importance of both child and elder care. The government response to the pandemic included several care-related relief provisions, yet many expired last year. Care jobs are amongst the lowest paid, least upwardly mobile jobs in the US. The workforce is largely made up of Black and Latino women, and there's growing demand for care workers. So we know that industry is going to grow. So how should employers and policymakers be tackling the twin problem of low paid work that does not provide much economic mobility and high demand for workers in care-based jobs?
Thank you for that question, Dr. Brody. And this is one area that is within my wheelhouse, so happy to try to answer this one to the best of my ability. So when we think about the economic impact of undervaluing care work, we need to think really not only of the predominantly women who work in the care sector struggling to make ends meet, but what these low wages also mean for the quality of life of her family, if she has one, her children, and the vibrancy of her community. Low wages in the care sector also often mean that workers in it earn such low wages that they and/or their families qualify for federal assistance in the form of Medicaid or SNAP benefits, which in effect means that taxpayers are subsidizing private for-profit business owners. For me, one obvious place to look for employers and policymakers to start implementing efforts to raise pay and establish better work conditions for care workers, is implementing efforts to raise pay and establish better work conditions for care workers. This also serves the dual purpose of actually helping to attract workers to the care economy. Better pay for the paid caregiving workforce has so many positive benefits that extend beyond just the workers. As we know, and as you mentioned, Kristen, women are overwhelmingly overrepresented in both the paid and unpaid caregiving sector, as we call it, the care economy. And in the paid caregiving sector, for those women who work, about 1/3 of them are mothers. So raising wages for female-dominated sectors means, by definition, improving the quality of life of children. Better wages also mean the communities where paid care workers live benefit. They have higher income to spend on goods and services offered in their communities. Higher wages also means more tax revenues at the local, state, and federal level, something that would be of interest to policymakers who recognize that for more good policies to be implemented, there are frequently price tags attached to that. We also know that due to the gender wage gap and the overrepresentation of women in low-paying industries and occupations, women typically have lower retirement income, including Social Security. So not only does increasing pay for caregivers help primarily women have more income during retirement, it also has the effect of putting upward pressure on their wages going forward throughout their careers, which again has a looping back effect of increasing retirement savings. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Would any of our other panelists like to add to that? Okay, because I have another question. So the pandemic transformed the way that many of us do our jobs, including an unprecedented shift to remote work. Hence, we're all using Zoom now. We don't know when or if another pandemic will arise, but we do know that remote work or hybrid work may be here to stay. So although estimates vary on how many workers have access to hybrid work, most workers would like to have more flexibility in their hours and work location and the ability to work remotely or in a hybrid mode at some point. So what should employers, policymakers, and practitioners be doing to make there be more inequality in how people work? We know that Black and Hispanic people are underrepresented in the ability to work from home. So what can policymakers do to bring more equitability in that regard? I'll start with you.
No, okay, thanks. Yes, great question, Kristen. I think that we've already alluded to this, but the most important thing is to create digital equity. And it's the last 100 feet. You know, it's not just laying the wires in the community. It's actually going into the apartment, in the house of the person, and then also helping them purchase the tools necessary to be a participant in this economy. Most people in the low income have some sort of a smartphone, but it's not a smartphone that allowed them to work and participate in the economy. So we need to help them with that as well. And the way to do that is for the various utility regulators in this country to impose to the ratepayers who can afford to pay it a subsidy that can then transfer to help people have that digital access and have those digital tools. Because without that, those individuals will be more and more left out, not just of work, but also learning, access to social services, and so on. It's more and more the case that, I thought about this recently, the pharmacy that I go to, really difficult to get anything if you don't have a computer that you can, or a smartphone that you can understand, or what the doctor puts on your chart, if you have a doctor. I mean, it's really becoming, a world dominated by people that assume everybody has digital access. And so we're really leaving those folks further and further behind. We have to address that. It's a health crisis, an economic and educational crisis.
Thank you, Jason.
I don't have a lot to add. I mean, I I will say that I think even as we deal with remote and hybrid work, let's not lose sight of the work that will never become distance work. and I think we saw a particularly vivid, tragic example of that during the pandemic, right? Where frontline workers, essential workers, had to stay on the job and stay on the production line and stay in the clinic and stay in the hospital, and they got sick and they died at much higher rates than the population as a whole. And in many industries, let's take meat packing as an example, the effect of that was disproportionately impacting Latino and immigrant and Black communities, right? Because the workforce is disproportionately those groups. So, I know I run an organization, we're dealing with hybrid work and figuring out our work schedules, but that, almost feels like a luxury, right? And it raises some challenges and opportunities, but we also got to keep in mind that we have to keep workers safe, whether they're facing a pandemic or extreme weather events or anything else, as we sort of evolve our workplaces.
Thank you. So I want to ask this one audience question. So given that productivity has increased dramatically over the last 80 years, far outpacing wages, should academics, employers, and policymakers start considering a reduction in the work week as a potential solution? How might employers and policymakers best go about achieving a reduction in working time? And I'll open the floor on that one. Jason, it looks like you have some thoughts there.
No, I don't really. I want to defer to my colleagues.
Kristen, would you mind at all just quickly repeating the question? I'm sorry.
Of course. So given that productivity has increased dramatically over the last 80 years, far outpacing wages, should academics, employers, and policymakers start considering a reduction in the working week? So I guess limiting hours as a potential solution to the problem of overwork. How might employers and policymakers best go about achieving a reduction in working time?
Well, I'll take a quick stab at that. So, I know there are other countries that have been experimenting with shortened work weeks. I'm not sure whether or not it actually means they are working fewer than 40 hours, but for example, instead of spreading 40 hours over 5 days a week, they might spread it over 4 days a week. So these experiments might involve not necessarily shortening the actual total amount of time a worker puts in, but shortening the amount of time, right, that they would have to be engaged spread out over several days. I absolutely think whether or not, the work week is reduced from 5 days to 4 days, or the actual total number of work hours is reduced from 40 to 35 or 30, I absolutely think that we are at a point in time where these experiments that are being conducted are spot on. The increase in the sort of the productivity wage gap does suggest that workers are absolutely more productive. I think that from preliminary evidence that I've read about these experiments, it seems that workers are happier and more productive. So, I think that I do think we are on a trajectory. And when I say we, I'm really talking about the global collective workforce. I do think we are on a trajectory, albeit very, very small right now, to really think more seriously about limiting the amount, the exposure of workers to employers. And I think that's a good thing. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. So with about 1 minute left, maybe two, I want to ask one more question. So while we know that we have a lot to learn going forward, we also know that each of you bring a career's worth of expertise about what works for creating opportunity for low-wage workers. I'd like to give you each the opportunity to lift up one solution, your most important solution, for unlocking meaningful economic security and upward mobility for low-wage workers in the labor market. If you just take 30 seconds to list your top solution. I'll go Alex, Carl, Michelle, and then Jason. Alex? I don't know that we can hear Alex, so Carl?
Sure. Sorry, Alex, I'll take your spot while you're figuring that out. One solution, I would emphasize on-the-job training opportunities for low-wage workers where they are able to spend time while also earning money and learning new skills and abilities. Underutilized apprenticeships, another good example. Growing but still underutilized strategy, and one that does not require them to stop out and lose income while they're trying to gain greater economic opportunity.
Thank you. Michelle?
This is quite applicable to the present, but also in my estimation, the future. We absolutely do need to raise the federal minimum wage, which again, as I mentioned earlier, hasn't been increased in 13 years.
Thank you. Jason?
Pass the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, which finally puts some teeth into our nation's labor laws, which are supposed to protect workers who are trying to organize unions in the workplaces from intimidation, harassment, sometimes firing, but do not.
Thank you. Alex?
Sorry. This is kind of related to Carl's, but I think investing more in broadening the scope and experimenting with workforce services. I think there's a lot that could be done, both to kind of help people think more about what career choices and investments are available to them, but also during their careers help navigate, training choices and transitions. There's a lot of interesting evidence that people sometimes aren't aware what their outside options are, and they might have more options relative to the current employers. So I think trying to meet people kind of throughout the career rather than just in a few points, and then really experimenting with different ways to do that, helping people think about, well, what position do I need to get into to get more training, right, to build my skills, as Carl's suggesting. I think there can be a much more robust effort to try to provide those workforce services throughout the career and not only through a few small points like I think the US system mostly does now. But because that's new, I think there would need to be a lot of experimentation with like how to do that in a way that is effective.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all of the participants today, all of our panelists, Alex, Michelle, Carl, and Jason. This has definitely been an insightful discussion, and I am happy to have served as moderator for this panel. I am now going to turn things back over to Elizabeth. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kristen, and thank you to all of our panelists for a really fascinating conversation. I know I learned a lot and I came away with questions, which is my favorite kind of conversation to be part of. So we'd like to put another question in the chat for the audience. As WorkRise develops our research agenda, we'd really like to hear from you on what questions you think we and our grantees should be researching. So what are the top of mind issues where if we only had more data, more evidence, more knowledge, policymakers, employers, advocates might be able to create stronger pathways for career and economic advancement? And I'll give you all a second to weigh in. So I'm going to turn now to our final speaker of the day. It is my great pleasure to introduce Julie Gerke. Julie is the Vice President of Philanthropy at Walmart and the Chief Operating Officer of the Walmart Foundation. In this role, Julie's programs help create economic opportunity, advance long-term environmental sustainability, strengthen local communities, and accelerate racial equity. Julie will share some thoughts on Walmart's approach to economic mobility. And so Julie, I will turn it over to you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, Elizabeth, and thank you all for being here. It's great to get to listen in and really stay on top of what everyone is learning. I'm grateful for all the work you all are doing. As we gear towards wrapping up, we heard from Mayor Andre Dixon earlier today, about all the work going on in the great city, but also the need to create economic opportunity for all, and that how that will lead to prospering for his city, but also that it's going to take collaboration, and that it takes employers and nonprofits and government working together to really make sure everyone has the resources they need to thrive. As speakers in the last panel talked about, it is this mix of how do you think about turning risks into opportunity, and that can be done with ingenuity and good policy and really important insights. The historic investments in our nation's infrastructure are an opportunity to support green development and create good jobs that build new skills for the future. So there's a lot of exciting work being done. Whether you're thinking about the future of work and how skills are going to need to change and evolve, or worried about potential recessions, we live in an environment where risk is constant. And at the same time, we have to be focused on opportunities to build a more resilient and equitable workforce. Walmart, along with many other employers, has used the reality of a tight labor market to accelerate career pathways for non-traditional talent, invest in skills-based hiring, and broaden college access for our workforce. Walmart.org, and as Elizabeth said, really where I spend a lot of my time on the philanthropy, thinks about how we combine that business action with smart philanthropic investments to change systems. We really take a shared value approach. We believe that when businesses do this, it not only benefits employees, but builds a stronger company. One example is when Walmart built 200 learning academies across the country to upskill employees and launched Live Better You, the free college access for frontline associates. We saw increases in retention and increases in sales. So we know that smart investments work. But we want to see this across a whole sector. And so Walmart.org has invested over $100 million in transitions to a skills-based system that leads to equitable advancement for all. We want other employers to see the value in learning, no matter where it happens, whether it's in the classroom, on the job, or in just day-to-day life. We are excited about workers having the support for career navigation that they need. We want employers thinking differently about hiring and advancement in a more skills-based, equitable way. And we are investing in digital infrastructure that will bring all this together to make the system work. As we're investing in these things philanthropically, we'll continue to experiment and try things in the business. We really want to see this transformation happen. We believe that working alongside many of you, we're at the cusp of really building this system in a stronger way for equitable opportunity. And together we can build an equitable skills-based system that creates the broad-based economic mobility and opportunity we want for everyone. Your participation in this conference is a sign you want to be part of the transformation. You're learning and helping us understand what works. And through the collective action, we can build momentum to keep it going. I hope you're leaving with a renewed sense of optimism, with new ideas to go back and try or research. And we're honored to be on that journey with you. So I am thrilled to turn it back over to Elizabeth to close this out, but thank you for letting me join.
Thank you, Julie. It's not Elizabeth, that's Todd Greenback here with you. Oh, that's okay. But Julie, thank you so much for your thoughtful comments and your organization's approach to economic mobility. It's been very insightful, and I've just been it's been great to work with you and to work along with you and your company and understanding how Walmart has come along on this journey. And so I certainly appreciate your leadership in this space. So thank you so much for those insightful comments. So it's hard to believe that our conference is coming to a close, but we do want to just make sure to thank our audience, you, for coming along on this journey as we've talked about with you. We know we don't have all the answers, but certainly you've been providing answers along the way. We've heard from some great panelists on some promising ideas on how, regardless of your job title, the sector or the industry you're in, how we can think creatively and expansively and collectively to really create a stronger and more durable pathways for workers who need and deserve economic mobility and to achieve success in the labor market, regardless of their race or their gender or their age, as we've heard about throughout these couple of days. So once again, we thank you for sharing your bold ideas and solutions. But I also want to just take a moment to thank our partners for creating this program over the past 3 days: AARP, the Business Roundtable, the Atlanta Federal Reserve, Family and Workers Fund, Jobs for the Future, Rework America Alliance, Marco Foundation Initiative. And also want to thank Stuart Andreessen, who is from Burning Glass Foundation, who helped us to think about this conference at the beginning as he was making a transition to his employer. I also want to just take a moment. This conference is about workers, and I think it'd be remiss of me to not thank all of the people who've been working on this conference, the people at Urban on our comms team, and all of the people who've been working behind the scenes supporting all of the speakers that you've heard from today. It really has been an army, and we celebrate the work that you have done. And we know that this conference could not have been successful without your strong efforts. And finally, we want to thank our funders, of course, for making this event possible. So I'll close with, and I've already been receiving a lot of questions about where's the information and how can I access various panels. So all of this information will be available on our website. And at some point tomorrow, hopefully, definitely by the end of the day, you'll be able to access all of the recordings from each of the sessions, and we'll be sharing that. We'll also be asking for your feedback. So if you will just take a moment to fill out and complete the survey that we've sent to you, we would certainly appreciate that. And then finally, we just encourage you to continue to connect with WorkRise online. And you can do that through social media or contacting us directly. We also have a newsletter. So thanks, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a great week, rest of the week.